And we're live. So we've got Thomas Sheedy from Atheists for Liberty here with us today to talk about uh, atheism and politics and libertarianism. Um, do you want to just like briefly go over like what your organization does?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Rochelle. I know that we've been wanting to get a discussion happening for a while now, emails back and forth on the docket for a few months. So my name is Thomas Sheedy. Thanks everybody for watching. I run a national 501c3 nonprofit organization called Atheists for Liberty. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization that stands for free speech, free thinking, and freedom for all. Care about a multitude of issues from normalizing atheism to safeguarding secularism and advancing free thinking and individual liberty. So we've been around for a few years now, growing more and more every day, online and in-person programming and community events and activism, all sorts. And I'm very glad to be here on the show.
I'm glad to have you on finally. Um, okay, so let's get into it. Let's talk about birth control, IVF, abortion, and let's just get straight into
All
it.
the fun things.
Okay, so recently, an Alabama court ruling ruled that embryos in a petri dish in an IVF situation are children. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I saw the headline about that. So I guess I'll do the typical HR marketing. AFL actually doesn't take a stance on abortion. So we have pro-life members, we have pro-choice members. The argument that we make is that when it comes to the issue of religion, there are religious and non-religious arguments that are able to be made for both sides of the issue. One thing I would love to see is the secularization of that debate. So a religious justification isn't used anymore to justify one's position on that, especially if it impacts the public health of millions of Americans. Personally, when it comes to that, in a petri dish, I saw that headline a few days ago, and I was perplexed as much as many other liberty-minded people are. Um, when it comes to the abortion debate, if you're a pro-life advocate, advancing court cases and publishing headlines like that only turns more and more of the public against you. I think, if anything, this ruling was a victory for the pro-choice movement, because I think more and more Americans would see rulings like that and come to the conclusion that the maybe right wing or conservative movement is taking things too far. That's at least my whole handle on it. I think, regardless if you're a libertarian or a populist, even a lot of people on the right would see a ruling like that and say, "Yeah, we have some different fights to take care of. Why are we focusing on this and going into the nitty gritty about petri dishes?" I understand, of course, in the Republican Party and in the conservative movement, the pro-life movement is the pro-life topic. That is, of course, one of the key issues that still plagues a lot of people. But I'm always been a big tent kind of guy, and maybe it's just that abortion doesn't affect me too much. But definitely, I think this was the conservative movement once again shooting itself in the foot.
I don't know if it was really the conservative movement that did it so much. It was just like a weird situation where Alabama has a law that if your child is wrongfully uh, ends up dead, as it doesn't necessarily have to be like they were killed, but like negligence or an accident or something like that, that you can sue the person responsible in civil court. And so the situation was that the IVF clinic was inside a hospital. A patient was wandering around the hospital and got into where the embryos were stored in the freezer, unlocked, no security, walked in, picked up a drawer, burned his or her hands because of the freezer burn, dropped it, and the embryos died. I don't know how many embryos were in there, but 3 of the parents then sued the IVF clinic for wrongful death of a child. At first, the lower court ruled that the law did not apply because the embryos were not children, but then the Supreme Court of Alabama ruled that they did meet the definition of a child.
I think that's where things get really fishy, and we can get into a broader philosophical conversation. Um, One could easily, within the context of the abortion debate, say, well, they're frozen embryos. They are technically not actual human beings. Like there are, there was this one case, I think from a year or 2 or 3 years ago, where there was this one embryo that was frozen in the 1990s, that was just recently unfrozen a year or two ago, and is now has now turned into a that embryo was donated, and now that former embryo is now a living, breathing child today in 2024. Um, you could make that argument, that these embryos were originally kept in storage to become full-fledged human beings. But then there might be some people that'll say that's going too far. They are just embryos. The issue is that there's also a multitude of issues, and I'm not a medical expert. I'll be the guy who memes on the podcast to say, yes, I'm not a biologist. I'm not a biologist. Um, there's this one topic that I love to pay attention to for fun. I'm not an expert on this in any way. Um, called cryonics. I'm not an advocate for cryonics, but there's this movement that's been around since like the 60s, where if you die, or at least your organs cease to be, but your brain function still continues, and you're frozen, cryogenically frozen, and your body is put into like this tank and container, you make this contractual agreement while you're alive that when the technology comes out to revive you in the future, you will be revived and hopefully saved and uncrystallized or whatever. Some people donate their bodies, some people donate their heads. You could then ask the very same question, because they are stored in a very similar way, probably to how those embryos are stored. Are those bodies that are then in those cryonics containers um, human beings or not? Would the families of these individuals that have frozen themselves at these cryonics facilities, would they have the right to sue? Um, or is it just because the debate is abortion, it has its own standards because we're talking about embryos? That's where things can get a lot more interesting.
Mhm.
And I think the conversation about what constitutes human life in this country, it's only going to get more and more complicated as technology advances, and as more mistakes are made in the process too.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I think there you're probably gonna have to sign a lot of forms, that the company is not liable if
Yeah,
something goes
waiver
wrong
of
because it's still
liability.
experimental. So, there's no, like, expectation that it's going to work. I think in the future, if it does work and we have lots of cases of people being brought back, and then a company is negligent and something like that happens where someone just wanders in and just breaks the frozen bodies, that you should be able to sue them in civil court for negligence.
Hmm. Yeah. So probably the way this ruling came about, there was a cryonics facility in Alabama that went through the same issue as an abortion clinic within a hospital. Um, Both are seen as medical facilities in the most part, I think. Um, I would assume that same ruling would be able to be used to justify um, uh, families of cryonics patients, or corpses, um, going to court as a result of this.
Well, the law was
I just thought of
specifically
that
about the
similarity
wrongful
there.
death of a child. So maybe for adults it would be different.
Yeah,
But the same
probably.
principle applies, I think.
That, yeah, just like how the same principle applies to adults and children that are alive and breathing, different standards there. That the
Mhm,
same would probably apply in this case, or
mhm.
in that hypothetical case that I made up.
Okay. Um, what do you think about Christian nationalism? Do you think that it's a legitimate threat and something that we should be worried about?
I actually do. There's a few people within our network that disagree. I know I'm a big fan of James Lindsay, who's on our advisory board. He makes the claim every single day when he logs on to his X account that Christian nationalism is an op. Um, uh, We even published a clip called "Christian Nationalism is an Op" to just promote what he as an advisor was saying on the channel. But I think it is a real threat. Do I think that maybe some of the advocates for some of these extreme policies are maybe informants of something? Who knows? But there's so many of them now, especially amongst my generation, Gen Z, that are pushing for this idea that the 19th Amendment needs to be scrapped, that homosexuality needs to be criminalized, that this republic is a waste of time, and that we need to just scrap it as a whole because it was made by like these evil Masonic, satanic, secularist founding fathers. Those talking points are only increasing ever more in American politics, and it's a very, very dangerous debate that's taking place now. I was on the front lines when this debate really started a few years ago online in Gen Z circles, college campuses, things like that. And I don't think too many people really saw the future of where that debate was truly going to be headed. Um, I will also say this, I'll play devil's advocate. There are a lot of people who use the word Christian nationalist in a derogatory sense to just mean anything that disagrees with their politics. From probably left leaning media anchors and more. I think there is a real distinction that can be made between actual Christian nationalism and just left wing talking points that just means conservatism or libertarianism, but they're going to put a scary spin onto it. The
Mhm.
problem with some of these terms, just like the word racism, sexism, homophobia, is that they're used in such a derogatory way and in such a blanketed way for so many different circumstances, the word starts to lose meaning. So this is why I put the emotion into solving this question and saying actual Christian nationalism, because I have to drill into people's heads that it's a real phenomenon, and not just some talking point that they continuously hear every single day on every single talk show.
I would agree that it is an op, and I think it's a very, very small minority. And what gets me is that a certain person hasn't been completely banned from everything. Like, that's what makes me go, "Hmm, that's suspicious." Um, Because and he seems to have had training. He's just a very good speaker for his age, and I suspect deep state involvement. And I think that the strategy is to have him there as a boogeyman so that more left leaning people and centrists can go, oh, look, that's so scary. We need to vote Democrat.
Right. Well, this is why I also said when I was answering the question, I don't know with 100% certainty. Maybe there are some people involved that definitely do constitute that. But the argument that I'd make is that let's pretend it is 100% no. Um, it doesn't mean that every single person involved in that movement is an op. It means that you have some people that
Mhm,
are simply infiltrators, and then you have other people that legitimately believe the cause who will still spread the cause.
mhm.
So the movement that we have at Atheists for Liberty in combating this kind of Christian nationalist movement, all the talking points that we make from a pro secularism, pro Western civilization, pro United States view against that stuff is all still legitimate in both circumstances.
Yeah.
And I think we should pretend as if it wasn't enough, because just the talking points themselves are things that are just absolutely abhorrent that we need to condemn. And another thing too, let's pretend it is an op. This should be a wake up call to all the sane people on the right in the United States and in politics to make sure that their own side goes against those kind of talking points and condemns these kinds of activists and stops. These people have to stop pretending that these guys don't exist, because if not, it's going to lead from their perspective. For if I was so concerned about people voting Republican or voting on the right, um, I would be concerned, because then you'd have a lot of people say, "Well, I'm just going to go vote for the other side." Um, so regardless of if it is an op or not an op, both have consequences for the country. The ideas of Christian nationalism, regardless if they were artificially created and generated or are real and legitimate and are just naturally came about due to culture war circumstances, they're both threats to the stability of the United States and also threats to the stability of what we as liberty advocates advocate for. Regardless if it's an op or not, okay, it just means they're either far right people or far left people. They still don't like us. They still see us, the people that are somewhat in the middle, either center left, center right, libertarian, centrist, Republican, Democrat, as an issue,
Mhm.
that needs to be bulldozed away. Um, so if anything, it's more of a wake up. We should act as if it's not enough. We should act as if it's a legitimate threat. Be skeptical in many cases where we can be, and oppose the talking points line by line.
I think the right has a problem where the left is always freaking out about everything. And so, eventually the right just, like, embraced it and was just like, "Okay, I'm going to, say things that are purposely going to piss you off," kind of strategy, the
Yeah,
leftist tears Tumblr and all that. Um, and there's a certain, something to be said for rallying your base and just being like, "Well, we don't care. You're always freaking about everything. We're not gonna play by your rules." But
right.
also for people that are, of that mindset, that are more liberal, and young people a lot, especially young women, definitely are of that mindset, and so it's not gonna win you new people. Like, it's good for your base, but it's not good for persuading and recruiting new people. Um,
Mhm.
and I we also have this problem where, there's no, like, differentiation. Like, most people don't believe in limited government power, and so they think abortion, fine, I want the government to pay for it, or abortion, bad, I want the government to ban it. And
Right.
there's like in the mainstream political conversation, there's no place for, I think abortion is bad, but I don't want to ban it. Or I think abortion is fine, but I don't think the government should be paying for it. And I mean, we libertarians exist, but we don't we're not mainstream, you know.
Well, people love extreme solutions too. So there's a
Mhm.
reason why you have a far right that's going even further to the right, and you have a far left that's even going further to the left. There's a reason why some of the most extreme voices on social media are only being amplified, because
Yeah.
quick and extreme solutions, those are always the sexiest things to look at,
Yeah.
and bland and in the middle and compromising is not so exciting.
Yeah.
Um, it's one of the many reasons, in my personal opinion, as to why the Libertarian Party just makes little to no progress. There's
Mhm.
also quite a few other issues that I have
Yeah.
with the LP on a personal level. Um, but I think it is added on to this idea as well. And this is another thing that definitely I know Gen Z is resonating with. This kind of constant support of the founding fathers, constant constitutional talking points. It's seen as parental, it's seen as boring, it's seen as something that they've heard all the time. And
Mhm.
so when it comes to being reasonable about policy, being bipartisan, it sounds like the same schoolhouse rock kind of stuff that they've been taught all these years. And you're starting to see a generation that's getting sick of compromise, and that's also um, getting sick of uh, this Republican idea of rights and classical liberalism.
Mhm.
People
Yeah.
want extreme solutions, and they're willing to tear down everything that has made our structure succeed in order to get their easy answer, without people really caring about the consequences of that after they get their short win.
Yeah, I think that there's a fundamental flaw in classical liberalism, and that it leaves you open to a parasite ideology coming in and taking over. And so free speech is wonderful, being open-minded is wonderful, all of these values that classical liberals hold so dear, but you also have to acknowledge that that is rather dangerous, because it leaves you open to being taken over by a small group of dogmatic people like communists to infiltrate and to take over. I hear people on the right and the left talk about McCarthyism a lot. They'll just throw it out there. Oh, we don't want to be McCarthyist about it. But the thing is, McCarthy was right. And if we could turn back time and go back there, I would say that McCarthy and his supporters should have gone even harder. That that we have to defend classical liberalism. The idea that the leftists have now, that you
Mhm.
can't tolerate intolerance, they're actually right about that. Like, you can't tolerate a different ideology coming in to a representative democracy like ours and taking over.
Yeah. Well, I saw this firsthand in the atheist community when atheism was really, really big in the counterculture on the internet 10 years ago. I've been seeing this in so many different countercultures, movements, internet communities, you name it, where, yeah, you'd have a majority of center left classical liberals, especially if there's anything in person. It's mostly baby boomers and Gen Xers that just have the same standard mindset that I think plenty of us have when it comes to a lot of things. Maybe they're unfamiliar as well with culture war politics and online meme culture. And you have this young group of activists who believe in regressive ideologies that come on in, tear down the entire structures, claim victim status. And then by the time people are truly awake to see the problem, there's rubble surrounding all of them. Um, so it's a very hard situation because uh, I'm seeing this kind of right wing reaction now to, well, this is the problem with liberalism. This is the problem with classical liberalism. We were too tolerant. We were too this. We were too that. So let's do this absolutely polar opposite extreme thing that'll just create more people despising what we did, and the cycle could just repeat itself over and over and over again. That's the one thing I fear. I think there could be a crazy reaction that'll just reignite the same problems that exist over and over again. And I don't know if that's just nature. I don't know if that's just something that will always repeat every 100 years.
Mhm.
But we are in for whatever that was a century ago. Again, a dismay of liberalism, small L liberalism, radical solutions in the far left and the far right coming over to make people feel emotionally valued, and systems that actually uphold human rights being torn down in the name of convenience, only for the population to realize that those systems were good once their cities are turned into ruins. I think World War II, I hate to, bring up Hitler and Stalin, is like this kind of example like every political commentator makes every year in politics, but it actually is a good example um, in this case. And then we created this kind of liberal order, which I would argue was actually good for many years. And then infiltration and corruption started to plague that order. People now see a lot of that stuff as totalitarian, and then we're going to go into the next cycle until we see the next batch of.
Yeah, I think it's baked into the system. Like calling back to the Constitution constantly, it doesn't really do it for me because the Constitution was inherently flawed and gave us the problems that we have now. So even if we go back to the spirit of the founding fathers and try it all over again, we'll end up back in the same place. And I don't think it's coincidence that the Roman Republic that our republic was based upon had the same thing play out. It's just inherent in the structure of a republic that minority groups that are able to um, work together and to lobby the government, so businesses or and like the AARP has totally had on like all of these consequences to our society, because there was a lobbying group. There's no lobbying group for parents. There's no lobbying group for working aged people.
Right.
But like if you have like a business, if you the doctors association, like all of these different industries were able to lobby the government to have laws that protect their interests and hurt everybody a little bit by raising costs, and they basically make quasi monopolies for themselves. and it just all adds up and adds up and adds up, and it also degrades our culture because
Mm,
the government just keeps getting bigger and they assume more and more of the areas that of life that used to be handled by the church. Like we used to have mutual aid societies and churches had a bigger role, and now we don't have mutual aid societies anymore, hardly at all. um Churches have been basically neutered, and because the government is everything and everything is the government, like there's basically no area of life, not even the internet anymore, where the government isn't controlling things.
yeah, that's why I'm not to put a marketing point in there. One of the reasons why I want to grow Atheists for Liberty more and more. It's why I'm excited when we get more members and more people wanting to do activism around the country, because it allows us to give people a sense of community purpose and belonging that some people used to get from religious institutions. Now, if you don't believe in God, you're an atheist, agnostic, secular type person. Obviously, a church is not going to be the place of that, but the same human biological need for connection and for institutions that aren't able to corrupt you and take away your rights while still give you a sense of feeling of coexistence with your fellow citizens.
Mhm.
That's certainly still needed. We just have to, from our view, we just need to transfer that from a religious point of view, because less people are religious, at least in the United States, into a more secular cause of that, because the same need is there. The branding just needs to be a little different. Because yeah, relying on the government for every tiny facet of your life is not only unhealthy, it's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, and it's really hard to even build those institutions or maintain the ones that still exist because everybody's already paying so much in taxes. They don't Most people don't have extra to donate to their community that's doing like doubling up on things.
Yeah.
And also our the society of our fabric the fabric of our society has really been harmed by the right versus left constant argument. Like
Oh, I'm so sick
I
of it.
have family members that, no longer speak to me because of my politics. That's a pretty universal experience. If you're going to say like anything, like on Facebook or anything about politics, you're probably going to have um, broken up friendships, broken up family ties. Um, and, there's the meme of like, you can't even get together for Thanksgiving without it turning into an argument. And so everybody just kind of retreats to their home. People aren't really going out as much. The lockdowns are over, but um
The
I don't feel like
consequences of
life
the
is back to
pandemic
normal.
still remain. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Um,
things are not back to normal.
I one issue that we're having at Atheists for Liberty is a lot of us have been so used to working from home, that now we're at the capacity where we actually need to upgrade how we operate as an organization, and it's so weird because we're finally now doing things that we thought we'd be doing um, shortly after 2019, 2020, only years later, because things changed so much for us. Um, it's very scary. As a Zoomer, I go to on TikTok and I go on Instagram and I see so many memes of people being unable to afford basic needs and necessities. People feeling lost in life now. The pandemic, I think, did a real one on that, but also the rise of these extremes that are just trying to collapse the institutions that we have. It's making people really question the future of their lives and
Mhm.
the future of really the world. Uh, and if anything, it's made me more militant in my activism to try to solve these issues even more quickly, because I'm suffering through it myself. I'm a young person navigating through life myself. I see it. I see it firsthand. So I totally understand where you're coming from. It's very scary, to say the least.
Mm, yeah. I feel really bad for younger people. Like I'm married, I have my kids, so I'm not lonely being staying at home all the time. But for younger people that are out there trying to date right now in today's environment, with where you have to put your politics on your dating profile
Dating app.
apparently and all this stuff.
You can, it's optional.
um but like like the male versus female, like there seems to be like two separate cultures completely and they don't get along with
And
each
that's
other.
only getting, more and more popular. That debate, which
Mhm.
I think is only gonna lead to more toxicity, more splitting,
Mhm.
is getting worse. Because I always love to pay attention to trends in politics. A few years ago, I know it was, like, combating woke feminism or social justice kind of culture, and then before then, religion was a really big topic. And now one of the big topics I know that's also just gaining so much traction, so much momentum is the male versus female divide when it comes to dating, when it comes to relationships, behavioral issues,
Mhm.
biological differences. And while some might have views on one side or another, um, the result of that debate is certainly having negative consequences on so many people, so many people that I know.
Mhm.
And as a young guy, it also makes me really, really depressed when it comes to looking at the dating scene because
Mhm.
um, made me realize, you know what, I think I am going to focus on myself more. I'll actively date around, and if something big comes about, I will. But it makes people believe less in the idea of these typical suburban family, meeting the love of your life, having stability in one's life. So this crisis of meaning is only adding to a greater problem too, with the gender debate now kind of making everybody hate each other and oppose each other for
Yeah.
characteristics that for many people they just can't change.
Yeah. Um and also there's this issue of like what's the point of even getting married when marriage is pretty like meaningless nowadays, when like people will get divorced for silly reasons.
The
And
group.
if you like talk about a problem in your marriage, people will just tell you to get divorced all the time. That's like a meme on Reddit, like relationship advice, just get divorced, just get divorced.
Yeah.
And so like that kind of defeats the point of marriage completely. And so it's like what's the point? Like we've become atomized individuals. And like politically, I want individual rights. I don't want my rights dependent upon being part of some sort of group. But socially, uh we aren't really atomized individuals. We're very much dependent upon our families. We need to form unions with the opposite sex in order to have children. We came from our parents. Um, and I think that religion is very, very important for keeping that whole thing running because there's a huge temptation to just say, "This marriage is not making me happy. I'm just gonna dip." But if you believe in God and you believe in a long-term sort of punishment and reward and like God is judging you, then it's possible to have a community place the long-term needs of the children and society and the family above the individual. And I sort of think that Christianity is absolutely necessary for a liberal democracy to work.
So I think this is the one point where I would have to disagree. um, uh, I think that there are some merits to quite a few of the things you said. So marriage, when it comes to the institution of marriage, my view is that I don't think you should get married unless you plan to have children. That's one of the main reasons why marriage exists, for you to foster a union between multiple individuals to create something collective and wholesome, that adds to the contributions of society. That's why there's also tax benefits and numerous other benefits to one getting married. Um, the issue, I think, is more political and cultural because there are societies out there that exist in the West and in other parts of the world where religion is at an all-time low, but the significance of raising children and having that family unit, that biological and civilizational need still exists. So, like I was talking about with the need for institutions, churches are a great example of this. I simply think that the definitions of those needs will change over time. So, as Christianity fades away more and more in the United States, at least amongst the majority population, it'll be filled with that same need, just with a different label. So, I agree with um, all the different concerns you have. The answer I just think is unsustainable. Because think about this: if Christianity is dying out more and more as a religious belief, and it's being replaced by Islam in certain parts of the West, and atheism and or secularism in other parts of the West, then you need to come up with a secular solution in order to get all these Christians, all these atheists, all these Jews, all these Reform Muslims, and more together in order to continue to maintain a societal culture that lives and surpasses the test of time, or the test of 50, 100 more years. And that's what's gotten me very worried about this. And this is one of the arguments that I make. I know that there is a trend among some people saying that we need to return to religion, we need to return to Christianity, but we're past that point. Not from an individual, of course, to convert. If an individual wants to make that choice to go to a church and convert to Christianity, sure. But societally, I cannot see masses upon masses of Americans all of a sudden going into religious institutions, filling the pews like it's 1954 all over again, and getting that nice white picket fence, and having that same kind of wholesome 50s style view. I think we need to emphasize from a secular point of view why marriage is still important, why having children is still important, why raising a family is still important, while trying to find other things that give you purpose in life is important, like having children and seeing your genes, transcend onwards, your family line, and having people to also take care of you later on in life is important. I think I think if this kind of need for traditionalism grows as a movement, I think it will be more successful if we don't assign a religious label to that need. Um, and I think really that's the only way that we'd succeed in the first place.
Have you read Highland?
I have not. I have a massive
Okay.
Goodreads list already. I will probably have to add another title.
I used to be an atheist, and I actually met my husband at an atheist event, and we had both read a lot of Highland. And so, we had this sort of similar wanting to continue our genes, even though we weren't religious. We were very motivated to get married and have children. And just, I don't know, just I thought I recommend Moon is a Harsh Mistress. He has some interesting family structures in there with like group marriages, but there's definitely like a long focus on like a genetic lineage that like goes into outer space and stuff, and it's like a
Mhm.
series. Anyway,
Yeah.
but we were kind of
It's why
like,
I want to have children.
yeah, like
Well,
I
yeah,
want my not ancestors, descendants to be in like explore outer space, you know?
yeah.
It's just very kind of like I imagined Elon Musk as sort of the same mindset.
I know he has a ton of children at this point, so I'm assuming that's the reason.
Yeah.
He's very space oriented, and so he's probably just imagining, you know, the next 1,000 years and how his family's going to play a role in that. If I had to,
Yeah, I mean, if I was Elon Musk, I would definitely be paying women to have my children. Um, but I'm a
he's like
woman.
a
I can only
king.
have so many.
I think it's basically Elon and these tech billionaires. They're kind of like the new kings in that regard, right? So they'll repopulate with a ton of other people in order just to have their descendants,
Mhm,
colonize the world. It's just like what I was saying earlier. Same situation, different definition,
mhm,
different label.
mhm. But I don't think that you can count Christianity out yet. Still, the majority of Americans identify as Christian, and the birth rate among Christians are so much higher than secular people.
Yes, that is true, and that's another concern that I have. Actually. I'm very concerned about birth rates in the United States from not just an atheist point of view, from a secular Western point of view. You have the Islamic world. that holds completely different views than any one of us in our liberty-loving society hold. They're repopulating at a massive rate. We are seeing what is happening to Europe as a result of that. Very similar cultures, very similar liberal democracies experience people's rights being taken away, all in the name of protecting this woke hierarchy. And people from the Islamic world that might have a different skin color than white people or something like that, right? In that intersectional hierarchy, any minority is going to, of course, be given a priority status in this new religion. And
Mhm.
so Islam and Islamism, in particular political Islam, is going to spread throughout all of Europe. And unfortunately, Canada and even parts of the United States are headed in that same direction. Why? Why is this going to be a massive problem? Because of birth rates. Japan is one of the most advanced, you could argue, atheistic societies in the world. They don't repopulate as much. There's already been this meme going on for several years on the internet of going to be all these old Japanese people with no one to take care of them. The robots, I guess, are going to have to take care of them or something. That is a deep problem. And this is why I would want more atheists to kind of wake up and realize, you know, your values are at stake. Your secular enlightenment based values are at stake if you choose to not repopulate, if you choose to not have children. Now, I'm not going to be, somebody with a metaphorical gun to one's head. I know of some good atheist friends of mine and colleagues who share the same values as mine, just do not want to have children in their lives. I want them, though, this is my personal view, I would like them to be in the minority. I would like the majority of patriotic, American loving people. And I think it's just going to become more secular and less Christian over time. So, Christian, atheist, whatever background they may have, to repopulate, to have descendants, to have children. Your very country is at stake because of that. Because you don't have any children, but the Islamists that are coming into the country do, you're going to be outrun. Congress is going to look very, very different in the next few decades, values wise. State legislatures are going to look very different, values
Mhm.
wise. We're going to have the issues that we've seen with no-go zones around the world happen in the United States, where domestic violence, I think, is only going to increase. Count, we'll talk with the founding fathers and constitutionalists and count a lot of that out. I'm very worried about that. And that's where, yeah, I'll play devil's advocate even against my own position there. That's where atheists need to change very quickly.
Mm. But do you think that a society or a society with a large contingent of atheists can you can most people believe in atheism and still have a functioning society? Can they still do all those things, get married, have children, keep the values, and do all those things? And I don't mean just people like us. I mean like average
Yeah.
people on a large scale.
Yes. So I was thinking about this a lot too over the last year or two. There is this common argument that's made that, well, we're all political junkies, we're all intellectuals in philosophy, politics, we go to all these conventions, right? We think about these broader topics like religion, like philosophy, like current affairs. We can afford to have those debates, or maybe we have the intellectual capacity, or maybe our upbringing was good to where we were educated enough to be able to have these conversations. What about the common truck driver or disabled veteran or person working not even 9 to 5, multiple 9 to 5s, just to put food on the table? I think the answer to the question is this. I think with those people's descendants that are raised in a more secular way, they will be accustomed to still having the values and culture of America without the religious label onto it. I think it's generational. So for me, I've been able to live a completely functional, normal, wholesome American life over the last 10 years of me being an atheist, like it's nothing. I don't see my personality being really different from when I was a Catholic. Meanwhile, if I was born a few decades earlier, I might have had a very different experience where my transition from Catholicism to atheism might have been a lot more difficult because I was raised in a culture and a sphere where you think and everybody thinks around you that you need religion. So what I think is going to happen is that the intellectuals like us, a lot of us are going to be secular, some of us will be religious, but like I think even the religious intellectuals would be able to have the mindset where if they ever became atheists, they'd be fine psychologically. I think for a good chunk of those working class people that are going through that crisis right now, but were raised completely religious all their lives, I think a good chunk of them would be fine too. Some of them would not, but this is what I love about America. You are free to believe in whatever religion you want to. But I think overall, as long as we push a cultural narrative that it's important to have a stable, loving family, it's important to have clean streets, it's important to love your country, it's important to be educated about the issues that matter, to care about your neighbors, but also to maintain rights, something that's very different from the rest of society. Then we will be okay. Um, but I never like to rely on anything. I never like to state anything without fighting for it. So I don't like to pretend that everything is going to be okay. I want to pretend like today is my last day fighting, and I have to do all of what I can to keep America safe. Um, because nothing is guaranteed. Things change all the time. But I do know that, yes, while more Christians have children, um, we're going to be secular. So we have to act upon secular circumstances.
There's a book by Eric Kaufman called Shall the Religious Inherit the Earth? And
Part of that. I need to put that on my Goodreads too.
I think it's a very compelling case that the future, like 100 years kind of future, like a few generations from now, is going to be much more religious than it is now. Because the like think about the Duggars, you know, the more fundamentalist religious people are, the more children they have. And it's such a big difference from mainline Protestants, or like lax Catholics and seculars. There's such a big difference. And there may even be a genetic component to religiosity. And so this is sort of an extinction event where we've changed the environment so that you can be atheist, you can be a heretic, and you won't be murdered for it. And so everybody who was going to do that did it. Most of them had much fewer children than the religious fundamentalists. And then in the future, those religious people are going to pass down their genes. And so the future is going to be much more religious. And I find that very compelling.
I might be in agreement with you, but then it raises another question. So I agree that the future could be more religious if, say, the Islamic world um, outpopulates the atheists and the Christians in the West, takes over the institutions, takes over the population centers. But then we have to ask ourselves a fundamental question. But we also care about liberty. We also care about living in societies that, governmental wise, are very secular. We live in a secular nation. Most of the societies of Europe have become very, very secular in comparison to other places around the world that live their lives entirely by God and God's rule. So it's not only then would the United States and the West become more religious under your argument, we would then have to concede that we would not we would not be living under a liberty loving society either. I think with the barbarity of some of these places that have not embraced liberty, classical liberalism, human rights, but embrace the live by the sword, live by the holy book, spread the holy message by any means necessary, screw freedom of speech. Not only would we then be living in a more religious society as a consequence to that, but we'd be living in a less free society too.
Well,
And
it depends. If we stop allowing uh, immigration from the Eastern Hemisphere, and I think that America doesn't necessarily get overwhelmed by Islam, but for example, the Amish are
mhm,
growing. They have very high fertility rate, and they're pacifists, and they don't believe in government. They're basically anarchists. And so I think there could be a future where the the country becomes Christian anarchists.
I just don't think, and I don't have the stats in front of me, just from a ballpark estimate, I just don't think the Amish would be able to repopulate enough to take over the majority of the US population in order to do something like that. I can agree with you that the Amish would probably have more children than non-Amish people in the United States, at least from Christian background or a secular background, right? I just don't think it would that would be too much to influence it. I what I would see happening is this. What I could see happening is this under those circumstances. Like if we were to close immigration from the Islamic world, or only allow people from the Islamic world who have been vetted, maybe they're ex-Muslims, maybe they share our values, and we pluck them out on an individual one-on-one basis. But just blanket Islamists, it's like we I don't know. I'm just making stuff up here. Maybe we close the borders there. We have more immigration standards. Um, we push a culture that is increasingly more secular to care about repopulating. The Christians will happen to repopulate more than the atheists, but once Christianity dies down even more and atheism rises up, it won't matter really from a religious identity perspective if we normalize in the culture that's good to have children, and then maybe we could survive that way under this hypothetical scenario. Um, at this point in the podcast, I feel like it's becoming a war game scenario, but it's interesting to think about because I have been thinking about these topics quite a bit because of what I'm seeing in Europe. I'm involved in an international organization called the Clarity Coalition, and we work on stopping the spread of Islamism throughout the Western world. And I'm very concerned about the spread of Islamism in the United States. And it's really cool that I get to be in this position to talk about all these ideas from this culture war, internet perspective in my warm house. But not everybody's in the positions that we are in, and I respect that and I understand that. People still, a lot of people need to do a lot of other things, and they don't get to think about these complex ideas. But these complex ideas are only going to get more complex.
Yeah. I think basically, um, the Amish are going to become the majority if things continue like they are, and the possibility that you could have a secular ideology come along that encourages high birth rates, but I'd have to see it. Like we haven't seen it. Someone has
Well,
to create it.
we've seen it. I hate to be like Bernie Sanders. Be like, well, there's some countries that you could think of when it comes to this, but like plenty of the Nordic countries, are places that actually are very culturally conservative, and have decent birth rates, and have been able to maintain that culture even as religious affiliation dies down. It is possible. I'm not making the case for socialism, by the way, but it is very possible to have there have been cultures that have been able to do that without issues. I am concerned about Japan. I am concerned about as well if those Nordic countries are going to continue those, their birth rates, especially with the political decisions they're making to allow Islamism to come into their country. But it can be done. The question is can we create the cultural and political circumstances in this nation to achieve that? Um, I say because there is no evidence for God that we should, and see the value in doing so, even without a religious belief upholding that.
Um, there's no country in Northern Europe and the Scandinavian countries that's uh, replacement fertility rates.
Now, have the rates been drastically declining, just like Japan, or have they just maintained their current levels on the most part, or with a slight decrease?
They're below replacement. I pulled up a chart. France seems to be the only one in Western Europe that looks like it's doing okay. It's like just barely replacement.
Well,
Um,
France is a good example then, because France has engaged in a lot of different policies throughout the last 20 years against Islamism and against jihadism. I know they've also engaged in like bannings of burqas and things like that, but you know, I wouldn't be in disagreement with you that radical action um, uh, needs to be taken. I think that we will have to do some things that don't infringe on people's rights, but ensures the rights of our people who share our values. Um, for their own safety, for the safety of our country. I think we will have to take some drastic political measures, maybe similar to how France has done to maintain our secular society. So sorry, let's just call it Europe then. But France definitely, I think, is a good example of that. Not only that, I actually like using France as an example because France has been the one Western country that has really embraced secularism more than a lot of others, more than the UK and more than the English-speaking ones. Sometimes France is called extreme because of how extreme they took the Enlightenment, but they were the ones who said that in order for us to spread Enlightenment values, we need to understand that societies that say that we need to rule by God and rule by the sword, that's a problem. That's what makes them so controversial. So I'm not surprised when you said France either.
Well, I'm no fan of the French Revolution. Like, the American Revolution was way better than the more
And not a lot of heads
atheistic.
coming off in the American Revolution. Yeah.
Yeah, the French Revolution was not good. And so I just don't, except for, like, a few of us weird libertarians, I just don't see how, a pro-liberty, atheistic ideology is going to become massively popular. Like, maybe someone could come up with one, um, but I feel like it's kind of running off the fumes of Ayn Rand subjectivism.
Yeah, so when it comes to Atheists for Liberty, I'm not expecting the vast majority of Americans to sign up for memberships. That's not the end
Mhm,
goal. The end goal is to basically create a society that emphasizes a love of freedom of speech, a love of country, and the ability to live a secular life without having a belief in God, to still be treated as a good normal person in Western society.
mhm,
Um, our activism at Atheists for Liberty nationwide, as a small portion of that overall population, we hope will then affect the broader population of Americans.
mhm,
Similarly to what we saw the atheist movement do before wokeism became a problem and took it over. And I would argue a lot of that is simply just due to political circumstances, boomers not
mhm,
understanding the Trojan horse theory. Um,
mhm,
there was a great movement that existed over the last 20 years to push on the left and Democratic Party that you could be a good person without God. And in many cases, in many political movements now, there's not any more religious litmus tests to be involved in certain things. I think the right needs to experience that. I think the rest of American culture needs to experience that. And the less we can use religion to divide ourselves, we can use our common culture and love of country to try to unite ourselves. I'm not going to be naive and say that we are 100% going to be successful at the end of the day. There are circumstances, like I said earlier in the podcast, that could make things a lot harder for us. But a secular solution is the only realistic solution for us to save the country during these cultural circumstances.
I find Christianity much more realistic, and I've converted to Christianity. Well, I was raised in it, and then I was an atheist for my 20s, and then I went back to it mostly because of Jordan Peterson. He, like, opened my eyes to a different way of thinking, and I was like, "Okay, cool, yeah, I can get into this," and I found it very beneficial, and I think
Mhm.
there's there's a lot in Christianity that can be easily thrown away if you're trying to think about it like a science. But you can't apply scientific thinking to religion. They should be like totally separate things.
Well, I agree with
Um,
you on that. They should be separate. There's no way for scientific thinking to be applied to it. That's why I don't believe in it. I think we should, not to come off as blunt or brash, I think we should see the world through a rational and scientific lens. Obviously, we are also emotional creatures, but just because we have emotions and hormones, it doesn't mean that the supernatural is real, right? It doesn't mean that that anything beyond the natural world and the cosmos as we know it is true. Like I love Peterson. I think Peterson also operates from similar circumstances. I think honestly he's a secular person. I think he's really an atheist, actually. He
Not
doesn't believe in the
anymore.
Holy Trinity. I still think he is. He doesn't believe in the Holy Trinity. He doesn't believe, when you ask him legitimate questions, you can search it up on YouTube. When you ask him legitimate questions about the actual existence of the Judeo-Christian God, he plays these kind of word salad games and doesn't even give plenty of Christians the actual answer, the yes or no answer on if he believes in God's existence or Jesus Christ's existence. And I think he is afraid that most people won't be able to live lives through this purely rational perspective. Um, but then we have to operate off of this idea like, oh, Sam Harris, I think Sam Harris or Douglas Murray mentioned this to Jordan Peterson, this idea of like, oh, well, then we just need to let the peasants believe in their gods, and we will be the smart ones on a hill looking at the puny religious people not believing in God. Like, I don't want to have that view. I don't think of religious people as dumb people. I think of plenty of religious people as plenty of smart, good people. But I think it's just a bad mindset to have because I think if we concede to emotion too much, I think we can understand that we are emotional creatures, but if we concede to that and say facts and rationality can only take us too far, I think it's a crutch to allow plenty of more irrational things in our lives, plenty of authoritarian things to come into our lives to just soothe us and make us feel better, to come in and to cause more problems. I think that's the issue I know plenty of libertarians and liberty-minded people have with socialism, right? It's this nice thing having the government come and solve all your problems, give you these solutions instead of you taking responsibility for your actions in the bleak and brutal reality of existence. That's where I agree with the Christians. I agree that life is a suffering experience, but that's the truth of it, and there's nothing that can change us from going through it. So we might as well go through it and live the best lives that we can.
I think that we evolved. I think what really makes us human is religion. And humans made all other humanoid species go extinct. I think we have the special sauce because of our religiosity. And um, that is what allows us to have complex societies um, at all, basically. The only reason why we are able to have societies greater than 200 in a small tribe is because of religion. And we evolved for a long time with religion. And if we suddenly just turn it off, a lot of us become mentally ill. And so there's sort of like a derisive tone of being like, well, facts don't care about your feelings shouldn't matter, but feelings matter. And there's no way, unless we genetically engineer it out of ourselves, that humans won't be emotionally driven. We make decisions based upon emotion. We are not rational creatures. We really aren't. We are emotional creatures. We care about belonging and being part of the tribe and belief in religion. And I don't think that it's possible, like in a very fundamental, deep down way, to be maybe there's a rare exception, but I think on a mass scale, I don't think it's possible to have a mentally healthy society of atheists.
I don't think that the majority of atheists are mentally ill. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a certain percentage of atheists who feel like they lack purpose and belonging and therefore become mentally ill because of it. But then we have to ask ourselves a few different questions. We then have to sacrifice the whole truth claim of the universe. There is no proof that God exists. There is no proof that there is a supernatural that exists the moment we die, that created the cosmos and the universe as we see it. So we're just ditching that. Additionally, I can concede that we're animals. We are emotional creatures, but we are logical creatures in that we are complex enough to have debates about these topics. So we're logical creatures in comparing ourselves to animals. And I've heard this argument a lot from some of these Peterson types and also Christian apologists who say that because we are animals, we just need to surrender to fate. We need to surrender to that. Then let's surrender democracy. Let's surrender libertarianism. Let's surrender liberty. Let's surrender these complex things that we created that were antithetical to this religious right of kings that we've had for thousands of years because, well, that's too complex. It creates problems. We're animals, so let's just concede. I would much rather live a life where I go by the facts of what is in front of me, and see the truth about the universe and try to see if we as humans can advance ourselves more and more to live better lives through this suffering, then live a lie knowing that and just conceding because we think it might be better for us. I think that's the risk of life. I think that's the risk of existence. I think that was the risk when we created this country too. Why not live a comfortable life under a king? Why not believe that God will just take care of us? I don't think that is something that Americans should concede to. And I think it will only lead to our downfall at an even quicker rate because then it'll just be us conceding to another drug to make us feel better in the current moment.
Hmm. Yeah, there's definitely that's how I used to think. I used to think, well, I wish I could be religious, but I don't believe. And it took me a really long time to actually start believing. And I can't explain it. You basically just have to go through it on your
Sure.
own. I can't convince anybody to be religious. Um, you basically just have to feel it. And so I was watching a lot of Jordan Peterson. I gave the New Testament a try. I had tried to read the Old Testament years earlier, but it was awful. But I started with the New Testament, and I had been going to church every Sunday as a child. I had heard snippets here and there plenty, but I had never like sat down and actually read it starting at Matthew on. And I was like, this is not what I was taught what it was. And I've been taught a false religion and Jesus's teachings strip all down the dogma of what the church has added through the years, what the Protestant Reformation has added, what pastors tell you it says. If you actually read it, you're like, wow, Jesus is has really good moral principles. His teachings are, I would say, perfect. And so I was taking my libertarian ethics and applying them to Jesus and comparing. And I was like, oh, yeah, Christian anarchy. And I read Tolstoy, and that blew my mind. Um, and so I think that you can't scientifically prove the existence of God. But what we can do is look at the results. And if something gives you better results, then I think it's more likely to be true. And so the better the results you get, the more true it is. So, like, if you're trying to learn rocket science and you're trying to lift off a rocket, it doesn't matter how much theory you have. If it doesn't work in real life, it doesn't work. And so I think of social sciences the same way. Like we can be all up in our head and be theoretical about philosophy and but like you have to assume some sort of axiom somewhere. Um and so I think that if it works, that means it's true. And I think that there's a reason why classical liberalism came out of a Christian society. Like when we got the printing press and we started actually reading the Bible instead of what the priest told us was in it, and we were able to develop human rights and natural law and all of these theories. And I think that we should, even if you don't believe in it, we should have profound respect for it. And it's like Chesterton's fence. Don't tear it down unless you have a better solution ready and test it for a long time beforehand. And I think we need to respect tradition more. Like all of our ancestors weren't stupid. They gave us a society. Like we have the privilege of living in the society that our ancestors built for us. We should not just throw away what they believed because we can't scientifically prove it.
I would concede that we shouldn't throw everything away. But we there are plenty of things that we have thrown away as well that our ancestors believed in, that biblical texts believed in. I also think that a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers, a lot of the things like the American Revolution, we did that despite living in a society that came out of this supernatural thinking. I think it was actually in opposition in many ways to this supernatural. I'm thinking, a resistance to it. Humans achieving something that they've never been able to achieve before, because for so many centuries we were told that the divine right of God is what gives you the right as a society to exist. We said, to heck with that. We're not going to do that. And we had founding fathers, of course, that were very religious. We had some that were very not religious, but we created something special in spite of that. Um, I think that I think a lot of people in this current culture war right now, I think conservative media is just playing into this a lot too. This narrative that we need to go back to church, we need to go back to God. It is one of the cool things to say right now. But I think it's just going to enter us into this new romantic period where we're going to idolize and romanticize everything about the past. And I think 50, 60% of that should be. But I think what this simply was is in the 2000s we were in a liberal age, kind of like the Enlightenment age, and then a romanticism, which might be where we're going, is going to replace that. But we're going to see all the problems, all the issues with us emulating and loving faith. We're going to see those issues, and then, like we talked about cycles, I think a new liberal age will come again. I think that there's value to learn from what we are experiencing, this kind of Petersonian era of things, to like stories, to like tradition, to like belonging. But yeah, I think we can both agree there's no proof of the supernatural. I think we should also understand why all the classical liberals in every single one of these cycles keep tearing down. And it's a complete teardown. Every single time the cycle happens, these unfactual claims that are made of, oh, just because it makes us feel better. I think I think through both of these lines of the culture wars, we need to respect the fact that we are rational creatures in comparison to animals, but we are emotional creatures too. And we need to do what we can to make both of them coexist while simultaneously making sure that the best ideas that have weight behind them win at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think we're seeing cultural evolution play out at a speed never seen before because we are like the faster our communication technology is, the faster we can communicate. So like the printing press was like a big change, and then we got the radio, and that could be used for propaganda and brainwashing the entire population. And then we got television, and so everybody was watching the same few channels, and we had a monoculture. And then we get like cable TV, so can be watching different channels, and then we get the internet. And so I think that we are fractioning into many, many different cultures, and especially with AI now, or very, very soon, anybody can just type in a movie idea, and the AI is going to be able to make an entire movie. And so Hollywood's going to totally lose its grasp, and we're going to see lots and lots of different subcultures form using the internet and AI, and we're going to see what works and what doesn't. And so I think we're going to see it's going to be kind of become the age of the cult, and not necessarily in a bad way. Like there's going to be a lot of good cults too. Um, and so I think it's going to be very interesting living in this time period if we don't kill ourselves in a
Yes,
mass extinction event.
I share the same concern, and I share the same, I guess, toin cost mentality when it comes to if we are going to survive it, because I see these advancements all the time, and it is scaring the heck out of me. Or maybe I'm just a boomer in a zoomer's body. I don't know, but either way, it doesn't change how I feel. In this
It could
case,
be really good, or it could be really bad, and we're all gonna die. Or it could be
yeah.
really good, and we're gonna have, like, infinite prosperity, and robots are going to do all the work for us, or we're just gonna be able to lounge around, have hobbies and stuff, like
We'll see what happens, but oh, yeah, I don't know.
I have some questions. Rochelle, sorry if
Cool.
that's too personal question, but do you consider Christianity an especially fit religion to achieve what you're mentioning, or more equally fit as some other major religions? I think Christianity is the best. that we've seen so far. There's a reason why Christianity like took over the world. And then we like kind of like evolved in our moral thinking. We're like, oh, maybe we shouldn't colonize the world. Um, but I think Christianity needs to be reformed. I actually really like um throwing out the Old Testament and throwing out the books written by Paul and just going Christian, the Jefferson Bible. I'm into that. And uh I think I don't know, I think it's really cool that he wrote this like secret like letters to his friend being like, don't tell anybody, but I don't believe in Paul. And I'm like, "Neither do I, that's amazing." Like, so, like, I was studying the Bible, and I was like, "I don't like this Paul guy. I don't like him at all." And then, I was like, "If I have to believe in Paul, then I can't be a Christian." And then I found out that Thomas Jefferson thought the same thing. I was like, mind blown. So I think that there is a future of Christianity, um, a new sect, a new branch of Christianity that is, just we just need to throw out the Old Testament. Like, mostly when atheists argue about, like, Christianity being immoral, they're usually pointing to the Old Testament, and, and it's this weird sort of, like, thinking where Christians are like, "Well, we followed Jesus, and he contradicted a lot of the Old Testament, but we have to kind of shoehorn it in because we believe it's all the perfect word of God," and it's
And
very
not to mention,
confusing.
you have Jesus in the New Testament saying that I've come to enforce the old book. I've come to to kind of rule by the word. Um, so it's kind of weird, and you have different sects of Christianity taking certain parts in and leaving other parts out. Um, I am curious about the future of Christianity, though. I think it's going to last in the West. It's going to last another 100 to maybe 150 years max. In the form that it takes, I'm very curious because amongst most Caucasian Americans, Christianity is being replaced by atheism or none of the above. Um, but you of certain groups that are emigrating to the United States, especially from the Latin world, Roman Catholic churches, for instance, are being filled. You know, you have old white boomers from previous generations in the front pews, and then you have them being replaced by younger Catholics from Latin America. Protestantism, I'm also very curious to see the future of, because you have some Protestant churches that are just emptying their doors, and with churches being converted to museums or art galleries or some other historical buildings. So I'm very curious to see the future of Protestantism. That's a big unknown in the grand scheme of things. Um, I think one of the strongest sects of Christianity that's going to survive and evolve this for a while is Orthodox Christianity. Russia, with its culture that really encourages religious values and people being brought up religious, at least in comparison to how things were in the Soviet Union decades ago. Um, Things are very similar in other parts of Eastern Europe where the Russian Orthodox Church and the Greek Orthodox Church reign supreme. I think those would be the sects of Christianity that would go through the least amount of reform or decline. Catholicism, I think, would outlast Protestantism, and I think Protestantism is just going to be let go probably within the next few decades. I wouldn't be shocked um,
I I think we're gonna see hardline Protestant sects are gonna become more and more popular.
because they're getting smaller and smaller, and so they're going to fight for their own survival as a religion.
Well, they're the ones that are growing. So the more liberal Protestant denominations that are kind of more like not worried about having a bunch of rules, they're declining. But the ones that are more rule based and more strict, they're growing.
Uh, Amongst Protestantism or more than Catholicism, because I would think Catholicism would actually be out competing those Protestant denominations.
I think by numbers, the Catholics are definitely the largest. Um, but then how many are practicing? There's a lot of Catholics that say that they're Catholics that maybe go to
True.
church twice a year.
I would just count that as Christians in America too. But yeah, a lot of Catholics. Yeah, I was one of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
We have another question. Um, You mentioned you were taught religion wrong. I assume it was I was raised Lutheran, not Catholic. Is it that against your argument the church is a solution for society long term? Um, so many churches are so different. Like the Christian churches need to adapt to the internet. Basically, uh like cultures evolve much like biology evolves, and we have a new environment and we need to adapt to it. And it just has to adapt, and it hasn't done it yet. Oh, there's a question for you. You mentioned Christian sex. Can you think analogously a name atheist sex? Good question.
Yes. Yes, I can. There are quite a lot of different atheists who, like Christians, like Jews, like Muslims, split themselves into different sects. And boy, do I find it to be annoying because I like to be an atheist unifier. So you have people who call themselves atheists, right? Either these are people who say they lack belief in God or they 100% believe that there is no God. I would argue most atheists go in the lack of belief category, at least how they describe it. You have then I would count a lot of atheists as agnostics. In fact, I would count the majority of agnostics to fit the atheist definition. These are people who claim they don't entirely know if God exists or doesn't exist. But if you ask any of them, yes or no, you had to choose one. Most of them, I would argue, would choose no. There are small amounts of people who say they're agnostic that technically are religious and do believe in God, but they're in a very, very small minority. Then we get a little more complicated and ridiculous. You have the humanists. So these are people who have set up an ethical framework in the world to have a moral view without God. Um, then, hey, Steve. Yeah, Steve is one of our agnostics. Um, so he calls himself an agnostic. So then you have humanists who have a whole belief system that they can be good and ethical and moral without God. You have a movement that literally kicked off in 2006 that lasted for 0.0001 second in the grand scheme of humanity called the Brights, which was some way for other atheists to basically make themselves special and super different. Then you have the atheists that are divided by ideology, politics, you name it, certain schisms and divides that have also happened with us. You have atheists for liberty, right? We were a product of other atheist groups and organizations where they splintered off because they stopped believing in classical liberalism and freedom of speech and not kicking people out of their conferences because of racism or sexism or whatever. And we had to form as a result of that too. So there's quite an array of sects within atheism. Oh, the skeptics too. The skeptic movement is a movement filled with atheists, but they want you to call them skeptics and skeptics only. So we have the same problem that as humans that all other humans of other denominations and sects and groups and tribes have. But I would argue that the majority of people in every different group, in every different sect, should unify more about what they agree on. If Christians unified more around the brand of Christianity, the Protestants, the Orthodox, and the Catholics, my God, would Christianity be 10 times more powerful than it is today. In fact, the religious right was actually very smart with that. The moral majority decided why not just get conservative Catholics and Protestants to band together on political
Mhm.
issues, which they did successfully for a very long time by saying, we are all Christians. Who cares about our differences? So I try to do the same when talking to so many different other atheists as well, because we have, I would argue, we have far more in common than we don't. So hopefully
Mhm.
that answers your question. But there's even more schisms and splits and labels that I can name too if we were to get into the ridiculousness of all of it.
I would break up atheists into communists, objectivists, the secular humanists. Um, what's that group? That guy recently got in trouble for fraud. Um, and they believe in like charity, making lots of money for charity in the term. What is that called?
There's an
Altruistic
atheist who got in trouble for fraud.
Slate Star Kodak is part of it. Um, yeah, like it was like a cryptocurrency fraud, and
God, what's his name? This
you
I
know
know
who I'm
what you're
talking
talking
about.
about.
Somebody help
Uh,
us in the comments.
he's this young guy. Looks like he
Effective
barely showered ever.
altruism.
Oh, okay, yeah.
He was part of effective altruism. And there's a bunch of people that's like a thing. There's a group of
Hmm.
them. It's very like tech in the tech sphere. And they believe in like yeah,
Oh, Sam
Sam Bankman Fried.
Bankman-Fried. Yes.
Thank you.
FTX. FTX. That's what it was. Well, that was the organization, right? Financial organization.
Oh, sorry. I'm like reading comments.
No, it's fine. I I'm glad we're doing the comments. Unfortunately I got a meeting in 5 minutes. That's how packed my schedule is. But man, this is actually fun. I'm down for round two ever in the future.
Okay, yeah. Um okay, rapid fire. Minarchist or anarchist?
Uh, I guess if I had to choose, minarchist.
Oh man, we should do that next time.
Oh, we got a ton, but again, with AFL, we have anarchists, we have anarcho-capitalists, we have different non-woke atheists that say there are a whole mix of things.
I think we need to break it so that the bad guys, whoever's going to be the next bad guys, whether the communists or whoever, the bad guys can't take it and use it against us. Let's break it and break up into many, many different communities, many different political organizations, and have voluntary
Maybe that's more
government.
the collectivist in me. I like unity. I like supporting systems that work, even if they have some severe problems. Uh, it's more worth it to keep some of these things alive than not alive.
Unity is tyranny. And it's just not possible.
Then all groups are problematic, though.
Voluntary groups are fine. It's the forced collectivism. It's a forced unity. And just culturally, we're not going to have unity over as many people as we've had back when we only had a few TV channels. We're not going to get back there unless we have a lot of censorship of the internet.
Well, I definitely think that if I were to come on here, we could definitely have a spirited discussion on that. Especially like I don't know, like national divorce. I'm assuming you have a stance on that. I bet that
Mhm.
would be very exciting, especially in libertarianism. Everybody, every libertarian conference is having that combo right now. I know
Yeah.
that I was at LibertyCon a few weeks ago, so I saw that when I
Yeah,
was
I'd
wandering
love to
around.
see some atheist community be able to make it and be able to be functional, and you could point at and say, "Look at us. Look at all these children we're having." And I'll be like, "Yeah, I'm so proud of you." But like I'm over here doing my Christian
Atheistforliberty.org.
thing.
Atheistforliberty.org. We don't take a stand. We're not forcing our members to have children, by the way. We don't have a stance on that. But I personally think I'm the founder. I personally think everybody should. Um, but yeah. So
Get on it. Taking applications for being Thomas's wife.
I'm taking care of that on my own, everybody. Okay. But for all of you, uh, go ahead. Um, but uh, I appreciate you having me on the show.
Thanks for coming on.
Uh, this was a very very fun discussion.
Great. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll do it again. I haven't done this in a while. I've been out for a little while, but I'm back. Getting back into it.
Awesome. Well, I'll
Okay.
be sure to spread this around. I already shared. And again, for all of you watching, I subscribe to Rochelle's channel. I suggest all of you do too. And for anybody from Rochelle's audience, you can learn about me by following me at Sheedy Tom, SheedyThom, atheistforliberty.org. That's our website. At Atheist Liberty, those are our handles on social media. Go ahead and follow us, become a member, join the movement, become a part of what we're doing here. And I'm looking forward to coming on more.
Great.